Hello, this is Stefan Marek from Conductor, and in this lecture, we're going to do a Conductor hands-on to discover how Kafka consumer groups are working. So now let's demonstrate the power of consumer groups in Apache Kafka. And so on the left-hand side, on the Consumers tab, as we can see, we have 0 consumer groups right now, because when we start a consumer in Conductor, we are not initiating a consumer group. But we will be using the CLI, so the command line interface, to create a Kafka console consumer, and it will be a good way for you to see the options to do it and how powerful the Conductor consumer is compared to the CLI. And so by using a Kafka console consumer, we should start seeing consumer groups in Conductor. So to do so, you need to go and navigate back to the Kafka directory you had from before. So let's go one up, and then I'm going to go to Kafka underscore this. Perfect. So I am in my Kafka directory, and we're going to start again the commands to use the Kafka console consumer. So to do so, you do bin / Kafka console consumer.sh. And if you're on Windows, again, please make sure to add the bin / Windows / and then Kafka console consumer.bat. And if you press enter, you're going to get the documentation of that command line. So it's quite long and quite tedious to read, but I know the commands really well because I use Kafka all the time. So bin Kafka console consumer.sh, and then you need to specify a bootstrap server. So bootstrap server is the Kafka host you want to connect to. So this is going to be localhost 9092 for us. And then you need to specify a topic you want to read from. So if you want to read from my first topic, you would just enter my first topic. If you do so and press enter, this is going to start a consumer, okay? But this consumer is going to be reading from the latest offset. So this is the very, very same when we were starting a consumer in here, which was my first topic, and we were reading from latest now, okay? So if you want to read from the beginning, then you will need to stop this consumer and do -- from beginning. And this is going to read all the data from the topic from the beginning. So when this is done, as we can see here, we get all the information, and here we only see the values. We don't see the partition number, we don't see the offsets, we don't see the key, we just see the values for our consumer. So this is quite interesting. And if you go into Conductor now and you refresh the consumers window, as we can see now, we have different consumer groups. So this consumer group right here is active because we are actively running it and reading from a partition. And this one is inactive because this is the previous console consumer we read from before. So if I click on this console consumer right here, I can see that there is one member, and this member is reading from 3 partitions, okay? So this is quite nice. And if I stop this consumer, then it will have processed 38 messages, and I go back to my consumers window and click on refresh. As you can see, it is not active anymore. Okay, so now we need to specify a consumer group ID for our consumers to start reading consumers as part of a group that is going to be deterministic. So to do so, I'm going to enter the command -- group, and then I'm going to enter a group ID, so my first group, and press enter. So now this consumer is going to again read the data for all the topic, okay, from the beginning, as you can see. And if I refresh this, we can see that this consumer is part of the consumer group, my first group, which is great. So that means that if I stop this consumer, I will clear my screen, and I restart this consumer, what do you think will happen? So the consumer is belonging to the group, my first group, but we tell it to read from the beginning. So I'll press enter, and as you can see, nothing is happening. That's because the consumer offsets for that group were being committed into Apache Kafka. And therefore, this from beginning option only serves if this is a new consumer group. From the moment some consumer offsets are committed in Apache Kafka, which we can see here, their lag is 0, and the current committed offsets are corresponding to the end of each topic partition, then the data is only going to be read for new data being produced, okay? So this is the same as taking the very same command and removing the from beginning option. So if I do so, I'm going to stop this consumer for now just to show you something. So I'm going to stop this consumer, and I'm going to start producing some data into my first topic. So let's go back to my first topic, and I'm going to produce more data. So I'm going to send, and we're good to go. And now if we look at our consumers, and I will refresh this, so this consumer group is inactive, and the overall lag is 3. This is because we haven't read 3 messages. So if I click on this, as we can see, the end of the partition 0 is 24 in terms of offset ID, and we have been reading until 23. So the lag is 1. And for partition 1, the end is 6, and we've been reading up until 4. So again, we are 2 in lag. And the partition 3, we haven't produced any message to it, so we have 0 lag. So when we start starting our console consumer right here and press enter, we're going to be reading all the messages that haven't been read by the consumer group yet. So this is where we see more data and more data. And now if we refresh this window, now the lag is all 0, which is great. Okay, so I want to show you something. So again, if we send some data from the producer, it's going to end up in the consumer right away, and we missed this. So let's do it again. As you can see, as soon as I send some data, it's appearing in my consumer. So Kafka really is real time. Another thing you can do now is to start a second consumer as part of the same group. So I'm going to clear this window. I'm going to start a second consumer and clear this window. And so I want to show you what happens in Conductor first. So I will refresh. And now, as we can see, we have different consumer group members. So let's just expand things a little bit. Okay. So we have 2 consumers, 1 and 2, as part of the same group, and therefore they're going to be reading from different topic partitions. So the first one is reading from my first topic 2, and the second one is reading from my first topic partition 0 and my first topic partition 1. So if I start producing more data from the Kafka producer, then as you can see, the reads are going to be shared between the different consumers. So right now it's just setting to partition 0 and 1, so it's ending in the first one. But as soon as we send some data into the partition 2, which should happen at some point, here we go, then the other consumer is reading from it. So this is quite handy again, because as we can see, the reads are being shared between the consumers. And we can go ahead by creating a third consumer and having part of the group. And if we do so and we refresh, now as we can see, and we need to refresh just one more time, here we go. So as we can see now, we have 3 consumers, each reading from a different topic partition. So let's send some data and everywhere. So I'm going to clear all the screens. And I'm going to send some data. And as we can see, the data is going into every different consumer because it's going into different partitions. And if I were to start one last consumer, this one will be inactive because we have now more consumers in this group than the number of partitions in our topic. So if I refresh this, as we can see, the last consumer is inactive because it does not have a topic partition to read from. So what I can do now is stop all these consumers one by one. And the only consumer left is this one. And automatically, Kafka is very smart and is going to rebalance things. And if we look at this, we can see now that this consumer is reading from my 3 topic partitions. So this is quite handy, and a demo I really, really like to show, especially using the Kafka consumer group from Conductor. So we have been reading this topic, and we've been sending some data to it, and the lag is now 0. And so if I refresh now, my consumer group is dead because I have I've stopped all my consumers from my consumer group. But what we can do now is we can reset the offsets of that consumer group. So just to show you, if I launch this consumer right now, it does not read any new data because the lag is 0. But if I want to reset the consumer group, we can click on change offsets. And this is to reset the offset of our consumer group. So we can pick a strategy. So we can say we want to read from the earliest data, and so therefore all the new offsets are going to be 0. But we can say we want to read from the latest minus X. So we want to say, hey, I want to read the last 5 offsets for each of my partitions. So now the new offset is 30, 13, and 11 from the current offsets. So 5 away. We can say current offset plus X. This is when you want to skip a message in a partition because that partition is problematic. You can specify a specific date time you want to read from, or you can specify now minus 10 seconds. And this will reset the offsets again. Please make sure that in Kafka, everything, especially with timestamp, is quite approximative. So now minus 8 seconds may reset to offset 0, even though we know that the data on offset 0 is older than 9 seconds. Okay? So let's choose to read from earliest, and the offsets are going to be set to 0. and I'm going to click on change offsets. And here we go, the offsets were successfully reset. And this is something you can do only when the consumer group is down, okay? When all the members are down. So here we go. Now I can start my consumer again. And when I do so, as we can see in a second, it should read all the messages, here we go, from Apache Kafka. And now the lag used to be 35, 18, and 16. And if I refresh, the lag is now 0 everywhere. So it really shows you around how the consumer offsets and resetting them is very, very powerful. And data in Kafka is read in consumer groups. So this is a good concept to cover. Okay, so another thing you can do is when a group is inactive, you can go ahead and delete this group from Conductor. And actually, this one doesn't exist even anymore, okay? Because this is a console consumer and it's gone. Okay, one last thing you can do is that I want to show you just from learning perspective that we can unhide the private topics, and I'm going to refresh this window. And we have a new topic here called __ consumer offsets. So all the offsets committed by this consumer group are going to end up in this internal Kafka topic called consumer offsets, and it has 50 partitions by default, and some partitions are going to be written to based on the consumer offsets we have for our consumer. So this is just an internal topic, nothing for you to worry about, and this is not something you can easily read from, but still a very good one to see at least once in Conductor, just to know that it exists. So that's it for this lecture. I hope you liked it. We demonstrated how to read in consumer groups and how consumer groups are showing up in Conductor, and I will see you in the next lecture.